So the Callisto Protocol is essentially a spiritual successor of Dead Space, right? One of the main creators of Dead Space, Glenn Schofield, is the one who created the Callisto Protocol. And so a lot of people, it has the same kind of element with the horror vibes in space. A lot of people were hoping that it would live up to kind of the hype of Dead Space. Obviously, it's not going to be Dead Space. It's a completely different game. It's a completely brand new game. But the question is, how is the Callisto Protocol? Because as you may have heard, there's a mixed amount of opinions online. There's obviously been some PC optimization issues. Thankfully, they've patched that, and it seems that people on PC are having a much better time. They only took maybe a couple days to patch that. So for the most part, a lot of the optimization issues have been addressed for at least PC. But overall, how is the game? How is the story? How is the performance? How is the gameplay? How is everything in and of itself? Visuals, all that. I'm going to be talking about that. Spoiler free here in this video. I'm not going to spoil anything for you guys. What you're going to see in the background is just going to be some kind of general gameplay, just kind of some combat early in the game, just kind of, like I said, very early general kind of gameplay. I'm going to try to do my very best to put as much spoiler free stuff in here as possible, because I want to provide you guys with reviews that anybody can watch. Unless you really are trying to go in completely blind, then obviously this might not be for you. But if you guys are still here, again, we're not going to go into any kind of crazy spoilers, so you should be safe. So let's talk about the Callisto Protocol. So first things first, it's a very, very, very short game. Now, typically, I'm not really against short games. I honestly, for the most part, prefer short games. I like when games typically do sit around the 10-hour mark as opposed to 20 to 50 hours. Once they start hitting the 20+ hour mark, sometimes I feel like a little bit of fatigue from the game personally. It depends on the game, right? Some games, a 20-hour game feels like it just flew by, feels like a 5-hour game because it's so well done. But a lot of games aren't able to pull that off, and so I typically prefer where a game sits around the 10, maybe 12-hour mark. I feel like that's a sweet spot. That's my personal preference. For the Callisto Protocol, it sits a little bit lower. So depending on what difficulty you're playing on, depending on how much trouble you have, depending on how much exploration you're doing, you're going to probably sit around the 8-hour mark roughly to complete the game. Some people took a little bit less, around 7 hours. Some people took a little bit more, around more like 10 hours. But typically the average median seems to be around 8 hours to complete the game. So it's a very, very short game. It's not very long at all. There's about 8 chapters in total. And it's pretty short. So again, typically I wouldn't complain about that, but I feel like the story wise, it felt like it maybe wasn't super fleshed out. I think the game as a whole felt like it kind of lacked something. I felt like through my playthrough, there was a lot of stuff that felt like it fell short. Story wise, like, okay, the game kind of just injects you straight into the action right off the top, which I appreciate. I think that was pretty, that was a good kind of aspect of it. But at the same time, you're left with a lot of questions, and that's fine, right? It's fine. You don't want to give away things early on. That's not what I mean at all. But what I mean is that you really don't know what really on earth is going on. Early on, something happens while you're on your ship, and you're not even sure why that's happening. And then something else happens right after, and kind of being very vague to try to not spoil it for you guys. Something else happens right after, excuse me. And what happens then is you're also left scratching your head and like, why is this happening? Why is this happening? And it's just constant like, why? And it feels like there's very minimal setup to kind of really, give you at least a base. It feels like you're not given a base foundation for the most part. And so when you're going through the story, you're kind of just questioning everything. You don't really know what's going on a whole lot. And I feel because of that took away from the experience, because you only start getting like some really kind of, good understanding towards the end, and by that point you're kind of reaching the climax of the story, and so you're seeing like the major beats, right? The major kind of reveals, and there's some little tidbits along the way where they're kind of revealing stuff, but again, I feel like they kind of failed at setting up a nice base point to build off of, and it just kind of felt like it's almost like it felt like instead of building a building on rock, they built it on sand, and so it felt very kind of weak and flimsy as you're going through this, because it kind of lacked that grasp because of that. Does that make sense? I'm trying to figure out how to put that into the best words, but that's the best way I can put it. That said, the story that is there and how it does end up unfolding is definitely very intriguing, but it almost feels like kind of like, I guess, a prequel, almost like in a way. To me personally, it almost felt like the game felt like one of those spin-offs. You know how like we've had with other games like Far Cry 5, we had New Dawn or whatever. It was kind of like a side spin-off kind of standalone game that's set in the same world as a different game. And this game almost felt like that to me. It didn't feel like a main story. It felt like there had already been something else, and this was like some kind of like, additional element or a continuation of something for the most part. That said, the way it ends is very main game-ish in its kind of essence, but for me, it didn't feel like a main kind of game. It felt more like one of those kind of side spin-off games that's set in a world of a previous, larger game. I don't know if that makes sense either, but again, this is just all subjective. This is how I felt personally. That said, going through it, the gameplay is very interesting, and I said this from the moment we got the reveal of this game, is that the game looked amazing, right? All the death animations were really, really cool, and I was like, dude, it's going to be a lot of fun. And sure enough, yeah, the death animations were insane and brutal and grotesque, so do be warned about that if you have a weak stomach. But it was interesting. I love the animations, and I love seeing all the different ways that you can kill enemies. But at the same time, the core combat felt very repetitive, and it got kind of tedious over time. Because you got like your melees, right? So you have a melee weapon, and you basically just keep tapping one button and you're bashing them. And then there's the dodge, right? So if they're gonna come and attack you, you push left on the left stick to dodge, or right on the left stick to dodge the other way. And it felt like a lot of just like with the majority of the enemies, just like dodge this way, dodge that way. Shoot maybe your gun at some point. You do get guns at some point. Add in a few melees, maybe some grapples and stuff, like throw the enemies into different objects around. And it was really cool, and there was a little bit of a variety there, but for the most part, I feel like taking on each enemy, except like the larger kind of more boss-like enemies, each enemy felt like it was a similar encounter. Do you know what I mean? Like it was very. Each enemy had a different way of attacking you, and each enemy had a different way that you would want to try to kind of maybe approach it. But the combat itself, when you would engage with the enemy, felt pretty similar across the board. And I felt like that kind of gave it a staleness, while it's one of those things that's kind of hard to really put into words again, because it's like, on one hand, like I said, there's different enemies that act differently, but on the other hand, when you engage with them, it felt very similar to each other, except for, like I said, the bigger, kind of more boss-like enemies. So I don't know, I just felt like there's something kind of hollow, something lacking in that department. In terms of, the atmosphere and everything, it was very well done. Is it a very freaky kind of horror kind of game? It has a horror element, and there's some jump scares and stuff like that. But it wasn't as kind of freaky and dark as I thought it would be. Now, maybe I'm just desensitized at this point from playing all kinds of other freaky games like Resident Evil and other kind of, more intense stuff. But a lot of people were like, is it like Outlast? It's nowhere near like Outlast, that's for sure. And it doesn't have to be, though, right? It's not that I necessarily want it to be. That's not a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a con. I'm just letting you guys know that if you want something that's super, super freaky, it's not super, super freaky. But I think that for me, personally, I liked the vibe that is set. I thought, it was a nice vibe. There were some jump scares where you're like, whoa, and you're just taken aback, you're startled. But it's not to the point where like you got goosebumps and you're shivering in your boots, which again, I think is fine, right? I think that there's different levels of horror, right? And in this case, maybe a little bit on the lower end of it. And it still gives you a thrilling experience without necessarily freaking the living daylights out of you. So, that might actually be a pro for some of you. Maybe for others, it might be a con. For me, it was I don't know, it was kind of neither, I guess. It was maybe more of a pro. I was able to enjoy the game more because I wasn't just freaking out all the time. Now that said, the graphics are pretty solid. They're pretty nice. There's some very nice artwork in this game. All the artists that were involved with this is just phenomenal stuff. Some of the, like I said, even the grotesque stuff, right? I mean, the animations, the art of some of these creatures are just crazy, just very creative and very imaginative. And I think that is just phenomenal in and of itself. And just some of the environments and the kind of the sandboxes, if you will, right? There's certain times where you can see into space, because again, this is all set in space, and you see some planets and moons in the distance, and it's just breathtaking. Some of these shots, it's just incredible. So the atmosphere was very well done visually, and even from an audio perspective, right? Some solid audio, not the best of the best that I've heard, in gaming. I think it could have been even better, but solid audio overall, and really sets the tone and the atmosphere, of what you're going into with this game. Now, I mean, there's kind of a repetitive kind of cycle with certain things, like I said, with some of the fighting, some of the combat, and just some of the things where you just kind of expected things to go a certain way. Like there were certain elements where, without, I guess, spoiling anything too much, there was just certain points where you kind of got this expectation where you're like, okay, I'm about to fall right here, right? I'm gonna fall like down this hole, and it's gonna, I'm gonna have to find another path. How games kind of do that sort of thing. This game kind of did that a lot, and you kind of got to the point where you just kind of expected it. You're like, oh well, we've fallen down a hole again. All right. Or, so different things like that, where it's just kind of like, okay. And so in that kind of sense, it also added to the feeling of it being kind of tedious and repetitive, in a sense, right? It didn't really kind of throw too many curveballs at you. It didn't feel like, but overall, like I said, you're going through this, and there's a variety of different weapons, that you can, eventually, obtain and whatnot. There's like a buy and sell station, so there's certain resources that you collect that you can then sell. Some resources are specifically for selling, others you could sell if you have like an abundance of it and you just need a little bit of cash, and then you use that cash to upgrade your weapons or upgrade different things, buy ammo, buy health and different things like that. So that was cool, and just the way that worked, and the whole element, like I said, with the combat is, there is different ways to approach certain enemies. Like there were certain enemies that if you're able to sneak up behind them, you could actually just kind of sort of like assassinate them, execute them, whatever, stab them in the back, and that's kind of an easy way to take them out. So there was those elements as well, and there was this particular chapter where there was a lot of that kind of element where you'd want to be more stealthy rather than taking it on head on. You could take it on head on, but it'd be a lot harder. In terms of difficulty, there's 3 difficulties. I didn't try as much as the hardest difficulty. I tried a lot of the other 2 difficulties, the lowest and the medium, and even on the lowest difficulty, it could be pretty unforgiving and tricky. It was kind of interesting to see that the level of difficulty was even on the lowest difficulty. So I think in that kind of sense, the accessibility of people who may not, either may not want to play, something that's that difficult, or may not, be able to, maybe not have the skill set to. It was kind of disappointing that it wasn't a little bit easier on the easiest mode. And again, I just tried it for a little bit, just to kind of see, trying to see, how the different difficulties would be, but all in all, like I said, it was a pretty solid experience for the most part. Is it live up to the expectations and the hype? I don't think it necessarily does. I feel like it felt like as a whole, it wasn't fully fleshed out. It felt like the game could have been more fleshed out. It felt like a little bit hollow, and like it fell short of expectations, and it fell short of what it could have and should have been. I think the game had more potential for what it could have been, and it's not what I thought it would be, but I did enjoy my time with it. That said, I honestly don't think I can recommend anybody buying this game at full price. As much as I think that the game is worth experiencing, I don't think it's worth the full asking price. This is the kind of game, sometimes I recommend you guys games that I think you should just wait for a sale, and this is one of those games personally that I think it's better off waiting for a sale. Like I said, it's a very short game, and what you're getting out of this short game, I just don't think the price is justified at all. But I think that it is a solid experience. I think it's worth playing. I don't think it's one of those games that you should just necessarily pass by completely. I think you should pay attention to it if you're into these kind of games, and that you should give it a go, just that you should wait for a sale. So all in all, like I said, I enjoyed my time through it. I'm going to have a whole series up on the channel if you guys want to see my personal playthrough of it. But, there was things that I enjoyed, and there was things that I found repetitive, tedious, hollow, and kind of falling short and missing the mark a little bit. So all in all, I think I'm going to give this game probably like a 7 out of 10. I was actually originally early on in the game, in the first half of the game, I was like, man, this is more like a 6 out of 10. As the game progressed, as I finished it and I seen how everything played out, I learned to appreciate it a little bit more, and it bumped it up to a 7. I don't think it's above a 7 personally. Again, this is all subjective. This is my thoughts, my opinion, and my experience with it. But like I said, I think it's worth playing. I just don't think it's worth paying the full price. So I will also say one last thing very quickly, is that the way this game ended, it ended in a way that does set up and leave it open-ended for the future. There is going to be DLC, by the way, that's going to be story-based. So I don't know what that's going to be necessarily about. There is going to be that, but I also think they have it open where they can explore more in this world and in this universe with a sequel. And I just hope that whatever comes next, like I said, this game has had a lot of potential. And even though I feel like this game kind of fell short, I'm hoping that they take all the feedback, they take what they've learned from developing this game, and they can make this game so much better, and they can make it a game that is more of a 9 or maybe even a 10 out of 10 in the future, either with the DLC or with a potential sequel. Because I think, again, this world, this universe, the lore behind it, there is some intriguing stuff there. I just think that they need to flesh it out better. And so I do have hope for whatever comes next with the DLC and hopefully a sequel. But as of right now with this game, like I said, it feels like it fell short. But I think that there's hope for the future with this world, with this universe, and with this story going forward. That's my review. That's my thoughts, kind of like briefly, I guess you could say, on Callisto Protocol. We could go a little bit deeper with it, but again, I'm trying to be vague and avoid spoilers for you guys. But hopefully that gave you a little bit of an idea, at least from my experience, subjectively, what the Callisto Protocol is all about. Let me know, have you guys played it? If so, do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Do you think it's better than what I'm saying? Do you think it's worse than what I'm saying, or are you kind of in the same field and same level as me? Like I said, these are all subjective at the end of the day. This is my experience. Take what you will, and if you want to enjoy the game yourself, enjoy it. If you don't. It's all up to you guys. But if you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I hope to see you guys soon in another one. Till then, my friends, game on. Thanks for watching.